Hello everyone, I'm Jen and I make useful English Lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary ideas and more to help you become a literary expert. So if that sounds like what you need, then make sure you hit the subscribe button below. So in this video, we are close reading John Donne's poem, Death Be Not Proud, which is also known as Sonnet number 10. Donne is arguably one of the most famous poets from the English Renaissance era, which is also the golden era of English literature when fellow writers like Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Johnson were alive. In the context of literary movements, John Donne is known as one of the representatives of metaphysical poetry, which broadly refers to a type of verse that features the surprising, sometimes unlikely comparison of ideas, a technique that's also known as the metaphorical conceit. So for instance, in his iconic poem, The Flea, Donne compares a flea bite with the act of sex, on the basis that the flea's sucking of human blood is similar to the exchange of bodily fluids in the act of sexual intercourse. Another example is from his poem, The Canonization, which compares the devotion of a lover with that of a saint, whereby the speaker views his desire to spend all of his time with his lover as being similar to a cleric who wants to dedicate all of his time to the service of the church and God. So what you notice, of course, is that from these comparisons, apart from the fact that it all sounds a bit bizarre and mind-bending, is that they're also paradoxical. A flea bite is painful and annoying, but sexual intercourse with a loved one is pleasurable and desired. Similarly, wanting to spend all of one's time with a lover is a form of romantic indulgence, but wanting to dedicate time to God is a repudiation of human indulgence. So anyway, this sort of irony is virtually a trademark of metaphysical poetry, and is often regarded as a testament to the poetic wit of Donne and his ilk, as well as the intellectual rigor of their work. So anyway, for a type of verse which requires quite a bit of logical reasoning, there's also plenty of lyrical expression which taps into the reader's emotionality, as in the case of Death Be Not Proud. So for context, longevity back in 15th century England was a luxury, and mortality rates back then were much higher compared to our world today. People died at a relatively young age. Average life expectancy was maybe mid-50s, if not lower. Stillbirths were common, and a lot of women died while giving birth. So death, being so prevalent in people's lives, was seen as being a rather commonplace thing back then. While Donne himself had lived to a respectable age of 59, he was no stranger to death, having witnessed 2 stillbirths, the second one also tragically causing the death of his wife and more, as well as the death of 3 of his children before they each reached the age of 10. At one point, Donne himself was so consumed by grief that he contemplated committing suicide, the result of which was thankfully not death, but instead a work of prose called Biathanos, which is essentially a defense of suicide, in which he justifies the moral grounds for doing so. But to have lived amidst a constant presence of death must have given Donne much inspiration for poetic creativity, which perhaps Death Be Not Proud is an example of. In a nutshell, the speaker in this poem personifies death as a haughty foe, whom he tries to bring down a notch by presenting an argument for why death isn't as powerful as he may think, and so has less reason to be so arrogant. So in the rest of this video, we'll be looking at how Donne presents this poetic argument by examining his use of language, form, and structure. So let's get straight into it. So the first point to note is that this is a sonnet, featuring 3 quatrains and a final couplet with an ABBA, ABBA, CDDC, EE rhyme scheme. Usually, as in the case of Shakespearean sonnets, there's a volta by the time we reach the penultimate line, signaling a turn in the argument which sometimes takes the reader by surprise. That's the way this sonnet works as well, and I'll go on to show what I think Donne's surprise is towards the end of this video. The speaker begins with a direct address to death, assuming a confrontational stance as he rebukes the popular notion that death is this mighty and dreadful thing, for thou art not so. So the claim itself is rather self-evident, but what's intriguing in the first quatrain is the syntactical placement of 3 sets of words, namely death, die, poor death in lines 1 and 4, thou art not so, thou thinkst thou dost, lines 2 and 3, and not proud, die not, nor yet in lines 1 and 4. Notice that these words are all positioned in a triangular pattern and invokes the idea of a 3-way relationship, perhaps that between the speaker, life and death, but more interestingly, between life, death, and a third separate realm of existence, i.e. the afterlife. From the Christian vantage, which Donne himself as a cleric would have subscribed to, the afterlife in heaven is something to anticipate, and if death must happen first before one can progress to the future state of heavenly afterlife, then surely death is not a cause for dread, but for joy. Perhaps this triangular syntactical arrangement will also conjure up for us the image of the Holy Trinity, wherein the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit come together in union to represent the true essence of God. And in similar logic, man will only achieve ultimate oneness in his soul upon experiencing life, death, and then entering the afterlife. So right from the first quatrain, Donne has already established the overarching framework for his understanding of human existence. And in this framework, death is not all-powerful because it's simply a part in a greater whole, or else just a conduit in an extended chain preceded by mortal life and then succeeded by a heavenly existence. As the poem moves into its second quatrain, the speaker invokes the euphemistic tropes of rest and sleep for death, which is interesting because these are such cliched metaphors for death, and the hackneyed nature of such comparison very much conflicts with the innovative spirit of the metaphysical conceit, which doesn't come in until the third quatrain and the final couplet, as we'll go on to find out. But at this point, the speaker makes a thoughtful point about death's daily presence in his life, because every time he rests and sleeps, he's in effect experiencing a sort of pseudo-death. And not only does resting and sleeping bring him much pleasure, but he will have to rest and sleep much more every day until he reaches the day of his real death, where his bones and soul will see their delivery. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. On the one hand, lines 5 and 6 convey an almost cheeky, taunting tone on the speaker's part, with the message being that death isn't anything shocking because the speaker's so used to it by now. But equally, there's a hint of self-soothing optimism in the calm, measured reference to our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery, implying that even the most excellent people must eventually return to dust and face the inescapable reality that however glorious or beautiful they may have been while alive, their bodies will eventually decompose into bones, leaving behind nothing visible but their spirit, which hopefully transcends to heaven. The most fascinating part of Donne's argument, though, comes in lines 9 to 12, when the speaker points out that death, far from being the master of our lives with the power to determine our state of existence, is in fact slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, subject to the conditions of time, circumstances, and human whims. For example, the decision of a tyrannical leader to kill someone, or that decision of a hopeless man who wants to commit suicide. And because death in this sense can't happen unless these conditions are fulfilled, it's arguably less powerful than the numinous forces of fate or even the agency of man. So with poison, war, and sickness dwell being on the same ontological level as these unpleasant things in the mortal realm, and as if this symbolic leveling doesn't strip death of its perceived superiority, the speaker makes a cheeky but witty observation that poppies or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke, i.e. drugs can also make us fall asleep, and arguably in a much more comfortable way, because death, of course, isn't actually sleep, and for most people, dying still brings tremendous pain. But regardless, now that the speaker has established that death doesn't reign superior in the metaphysical order, because it's just one piece of the puzzle, transporting one from the mortal to the spiritual state, or in the existential hierarchy either, because it only happens if sickness or violence conditions it to, then there's no reason for death to be so arrogant. Indeed, the speaker asks, why swellst thou then? There's also a brilliant irony in the choice of verb swell, because apart from its meaning of swelling up with pride as an arrogant person would, it also invokes the image of the swelling of a mother's belly, which of course marks the beginning of human life. So in a way, we're coming full circle with this connected image of the swelling womb of life and the swollen pride of death. The connection being that life and death exist on the same wavelength, and not on opposite ends, because Christian teleology doesn't conclude at the point when a person dies physically, but continues on into life after death. The final couplet reveals the grand irony at the heart of death. Rather than thinking of death as the terminating point of life, it's perhaps more instructive to consider life as a checkpoint in our journey towards the afterlife, wherein death is but one short sleep, past which we wake eternally and death shall be no more. The main point of our existence, then, isn't the living that we are currently experiencing, even though mortal time would have us feel this to be the case. Rather, we're simply in a brief transitional stage moving towards a future state of heavenly existence, which is the real, ultimate life for a devout Christian like Donne. So the final antinacluses of death, thou shalt die, antinacluses being the use of the same root word but in different parts of speech, crystallizes the paradox of the speaker's argument, which is that the concept of death being this fearsome, terrifying thing must die if one were to embrace the Christian doctrine of heavenly afterlife. Because dying isn't anything to be feared as an endpoint to life, but rather a channel through which we travel to a better, more elevated state of being. And in the lexical shift from the static nature of the noun death to the dynamic connotation of the verb die, the speaker is invited to break away from the fossilized misconception of death as the scary final destination, a dead stop, a static state, a dead end to everything as we know it, but instead to reinvigorate our concept of death as a fluid process moving us through one state of being to another. And there you have it, everyone. That is my analysis of John Donne's sonnet, Death Be Not Proud, which is probably one of his most iconic poems of all time. I hope this encourages you to come up with your own creative insights into the themes of death, the soul, and the afterlife, and to see how poetic craft and form can convey such timeless ideas in new, original ways. So for your next video, I recommend that you watch my video series on Shakespeare's most famous sonnets, which includes my detailed analyses of Sonnet 18, which is Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, Sonnet 29, When in Disgrace with Fortune and Men's Eyes, Sonnet 116, Let Me Not to the Marriage of True Minds, and Sonnet 130, My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun. So as always, hit that thumbs up button below if you found this video helpful in any way, so that YouTube will know to share this with other passionate lit learners like yourself all around the world. And of course that you can encourage me to keep making these useful lit study videos for you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below if you haven't already, so that you never miss out on my future weekly videos. And you can also consider joining my membership program if you want to make exclusive video requests and enjoy essay review perks. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye!